Today, we're going to travel back in time, back to the 17th and 18th century England, to see how the whole idea of criticism even started. I mean, an idea we totally take for granted now. We're going to explore how two literary giants, John Dryden and Alexander Pope, looked at the chaotic world of art and tried to give it some rules, basically creating the foundation for how we argue about books, plays, and movies today. So, let me just start with a question for you. When you finish a movie or a book, what do? I mean, what's your process? Do you immediately grab your phone and check the score online, read a bunch of reviews? Or are you the type to argue with your friends for hours about plot holes and brilliant acting? We just have this whole ecosystem for judging art, don't we?
Well, try to imagine a time when none of that was there. Seriously, no professional critics, no agreed-upon rules for what made a play a hit, not even a common language to have the debate in the first place. That was pretty much the world before the neoclassical period in England, and that's the exact problem that our two main figures, Dryden and Pope, set out to solve.
To really get this, we have to put ourselves back in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. England had just been through a horrifyingly bloody civil war. They'd executed their king. It was chaos. So when Charles II came back to the throne in 1660, there was this desperate hunger for order, for stability, for rules, and not just in politics, but in art too. And that is the stage for our story.
So here's what we'll get into. We'll look at this quest for order, see how these thinkers look to the past for answers, dive into the great debates that really shaped their ideas, and then watch as John Dryden and Alexander Pope lay down the laws for art and criticism, laws that, you'll see, we still feel the effects of today.
All right, first up, this deep, society-wide need for structure. After decades of just pure chaos, the English intellectual world was craving certainty. They wanted clear, universal rules for everything. And this craving gave rise to neoclassicism. You know, the core idea here was that art wasn't just some mysterious flash of inspiration that hits you out of the blue. No, they saw it as a craft, a skill, something that could be studied, practiced, and perfected, all by following a set of rational, universal principles. They really believed you could engineer a good poem the same way you could engineer a bridge.
And this connection between art and science, it's perfectly captured in Alexander Pope's famous epitaph for Sir Isaac Newton. The thinking was basically, look, if Newton can discover the universal laws that govern the planets, then why can't a poet or a critic discover the universal laws that govern a good story? Their job, as they saw it, was to find those timeless truths of nature and express them perfectly.
But, okay, where do you even find these universal laws for art? Well, for the neoclassicists, the answer is actually pretty simple. You look to the past. They turned straight to the classical masters of Greece and Rome, guys like the philosopher Aristotle and the poet Horace. These writers, who they called the ancients, weren't just some old authors to them. They were seen as the OGs, the original discoverers of nature's artistic laws. Their works were the actual blueprints for perfection.
But this wasn't just a simple case of, copying old homework. This whole quest for rules sparked some really fierce arguments, and those arguments are what actually created the field of criticism as we know it today. So, the first big debate was between the ancients and the moderns. The ancients camp, they argued for sticking to the classical rules, no exceptions. But the moderns, they pushed back. They said, hey, we can learn from the classics, but we can also improve on them. It was a classic showdown between tradition and innovation.
Then you had the debate over imitation versus imagination. The main view was that art should be a lively imitation of nature, or mimesis. But, and this is a big but, it had to be controlled by reason and judgment. Its wild cousin, imagination, or fancy as they called it back then, was seen as kind of dangerous. It was this chaotic force that could lead you to disorder and untruth if it wasn't kept on a really tight leash by cold, hard reason.
And finally, they argued about the very purpose of art. I mean, what's it for? Is it just to delight and entertain people? Or is its job to instruct them, to teach a moral lesson, with delight just being, the sugar that helps the medicine go down? It's a question we are still arguing about today, and critics like Dryden actually changed their minds on this over the course of their careers.
So who was the person who took all these abstract kind of academic debates and turned them into something truly compelling? Well, that would be John Dryden, a man who's rightly called the father of English criticism.
In 1668, Dryden published his masterpiece, An Essay of Dramatic Poesy. And the way he did it is just brilliant. He didn't write some dry academic paper. Instead, he framed the entire argument as a lively conversation between four educated gentlemen floating down the River Thames on a barge. And get this,
all while the sound of a naval battle against the Dutch is echoing in the distance. It's literally a battle of ideas set against a real battle.
And on that barge, he gives us this cast of characters, and each one represents a different point of view. You've got Kreitz, who argues for the ancients, basically saying the old ways are the best. Eugenius champions the moderns. Lycidaeus praises the super-rigid, rule-obsessed French drama of the time. And then you have Neander, the new man, who is pretty much Dryden's stand-in, making the case for the unique genius of English drama.
And Neander's big point is captured in this fantastic line. He argues that French plays, because they follow all the rules so perfectly, are beautiful but totally lifeless, like a statue. English plays, on the other hand, think Shakespeare. They might be a little messy, they might break the rules, but man, they are just teeming with life, with variety, with the true soul of poesy. Dryden is defending a tradition of vibrant imperfection over a kind of sterile correctness.
Okay, let's move on to our next key figure and see how all this builds. Because if Dryden basically mapped out the battlefield for what makes art good, Alexander Pope came along a few decades later and wrote the official rulebook for the judges.
So in his famous essay on criticism, Pope really elevates the role of the critic. For him, a good critic wasn't just some grumpy fault finder. No, they were on the exact same mission as the artist, to understand and reveal the universal truths of nature. For Pope, both writing and judging were seen as almost sacred duties. And then Pope lays out a super clear guide for how to be a good critic. First, follow nature. That's the one unchanging standard. Second, know the context of the work. Don't just judge it in a vacuum. And third and fourth, and this is so key for Pope, avoid pride and be humble. He really believed the biggest failing of bad critics was just pure arrogance, the belief that their own personal taste was universal law.
And it's this exact arrogance that Pope is warning against in one of his most famous lines ever, which comes from this essay. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. It's a timeless warning against that kind of sloppy, ill-informed, hasty judgment that he saw as the enemy of both good art and good criticism.
So why does any of this stuff still matter today? I mean, what did Dryden and Pope and all their contemporaries actually leave us with?
Well, their legacy is enormous. They pretty much invented literary criticism as a formal discipline. They established the fundamental questions we still ask all the time. How do you balance tradition with innovation? What's art for? Is it for delight or for instruction? What's more important, following the rules or just raw genius? They gave us the vocabulary and the framework to even have these conversations, and they solidified the idea of the critic as a kind of public guide.
So I'll just leave you with this thought. The next time you post a review online or get into an argument about the ending of a TV show, think back to those guys on that barge on the Thames. Are you demanding that the show stick to the rules of its genre, like an ancient, or are you celebrating its wild originality, like a modern? Chances are you're wrestling with the very same questions that John Dryden and Alexander Pope first brought to light over 300 years ago.